Hey y'all, it's Laura, and welcome back to a new series called Budget Scrapbooking. And the way this series is going to work is we're going to explore some low-cost options for scrapbooking. And for me, that means picking a 12 by 12 paper pad. I'm going to be using this one, which is Paige Evans Whimsical, because it has a lot of icons, a nice bright open color scheme, and cut aparts in the paper pad. So it does not have to be a giant paper pad by any stretch of the imagination. I think this one only has 30 some odd pages in it. Not too bad. If you have a smaller paper pad, that will work as well. You won't need to use all of the papers inside. But those are the qualifications I would use when choosing a paper pad for this series if you want to join in. Now, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be making some DIY embellishments from this paper pad and then scrapping with them. So putting together a small kit and then creating 4 to 5 layouts with that kit. So I hope you enjoy this little series, and let's head over to the desk to see what we're going to be working on today. Hey y'all, it's Laura, and I have for you today a little progress update. Before we jump into some of the DIY embellishments we're going to do, I just thought I'd show you where we're at. So if you saw the introductory video, you saw that I had pulled the Whimsical paper pad to work with this month, and I was going to make my own embellishments, and then we were going to scrap several layouts. So this is a progress report, if you will, update. So this was the cut apart page that I've cut into some 4x6 and smaller little bits and pieces. Some of them are just colorful blocks. Some of them have words. We have some tags and circles and a few word phrases. So a couple of things that we can use for embellishment. These are the strips from the papers that I pulled from the paper pad. So I pulled several, and these are like the little strips that were attached. I'm going to use these largely for border strips, but also as creating these little kind of fishtailed banners as well. So I'll use them for both. May use some of them to frame out photos, which is a technique I do fairly often of just kind of going around the outside of the photo, the border, instead of backing the whole behind the photo situation. So that's what these can be used for. I also have fussy cutting. So I went a little wild with my fussy cutting. Just so you know, I did a lot of this at the tail end of September before I started packing. Well, I had been packing for a long time, so I had some free time before we had to move. And so I cut up an entire page of little word phrases to use. Some of these are big enough for titles. I've got some small butterflies from a full page of butterflies that was in the pack. There was a floral, so I fussy cut that as well. So tons and tons of florals to use. I have there was one icon sheet that had some like little artsy things and like buttons and glue guns and hearts and things like that. So that's this one. There was one that was clouds. So I cut out a bunch of clouds as well. So doing really well on the icons available, but now we're going to work on creating some more embellishments that we can use to create our layouts without having to dip into any other stash. So I'm really hoping to do this project without dipping into anything else, because I want you to literally be able to just use paper pad to do some scrapping. Because quite often I find that when you're on a budget, the paper pads can be much cheaper. Actually, they are much cheaper than buying the wonderful two-sided paper that I absolutely love. They can be way cheaper to get the paper pads and just bigger bang for your buck. And so if you are working on a budget, I would really suggest finding a paper pad that you're just absolutely in love with, that has a lot to work from. You have lots of icons you could fussy cut out, because that's going to save you a lot of money in buying embellishments. Okay, so these are the papers that I have pulled to work with this month, and I have some ideas for how I'm going to use them. But these are specifically the papers that I've pulled out. This one had already been cut into, and that's fine. So I just went ahead and incorporated it. Figured we'd finish it off. And I have some ideas for them, but we'll see how it goes. I've got a good selection here of multicolor papers, as well as papers that read as solids and papers that would be super easy to use as a background, things like that. I wanted a little bit of everything. Like this one reads kind of tone on tone, pink on purple, but it's pretty close to tone on tone. Same here. So a good mix of those, both multicolored, the good backgrounds, and the kind of simple patterns as well. So these are the papers that I pulled out. So what are we going to do today? Today we're going to talk about frames and die cutting. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a big fancy big shot. This one is the fold away, which I prefer just because it takes up a lot less space. But you don't have to have something like that. You can have punches. You can simply use your lovely little paper cutter. Now, if you're doing scrapbooking of any kind, I would recommend having a paper cutter. They do not have to be the most expensive one. This is from Dress My Craft, and I don't remember exactly how much it is, but it's not super expensive. It's not huge. It doesn't take up a lot of space. It does measure out to 17 inches, I believe. Yes, with this little arm, but I like that it's compact, light, easy, and I can just put it away and pull it back out super easily. So we're gonna start with this, and we're gonna make some frames using this. Now, I wanted to make two kinds of frames for this kit, and we're gonna start with these two papers, I believe. Might pull in some of the others as well, but this is where we're gonna start. And I'm going to create with these two papers, first and foremost, large frames. So these are gonna be frames for a whole layout. Now, normally I wouldn't do these. I wouldn't like prepare these ahead of time, simply because I don't know if I'm gonna be doing 12 by 12 or 9 by 12 layouts. And so normally I wouldn't do these ahead of time, but for the purposes of this project, I'm just going to assume that one of them is 12 by 12 and one of them is 9 by 12. And that way I've got one of each. Okay. Now, because this is such a busy pattern, I'm not super likely to want to use this as a full background anyway. That's how I chose this paper, these two papers, is because they're super busy. I'm probably not going to use them as backgrounds, and they're a great background paper to use behind a piece of white cardstock. So if I use one of my other papers, the back of it, of course, because these are just from a paper pad, is white. If I have just this little bit of a border showing, even though it's super busy, that little bit of a border looks really cool and adds a lot of flavor to the page. So that is why I chose these two papers to use to create these borders. So this one's going to be a 12 by 12, and I'm just simply cutting 3/4 inch all the way around, measuring it on my paper cutter, 3/4 of an inch all the way around, making sure I don't go all the way through, so that we do have a little border on all sides, okay? And then you pop that out and you have a large frame, and you have this smaller piece that we're gonna be using for a couple of other things. So there's a couple of options with this. One, I think I may cut out a section of this and punch out some of these stars later on, or I could simply use this on a piece of white cardstock like this. And so you kind of have an instant background. So that is two options, a couple of ideas how we could use them, but that's an option or two of how to use these papers. So for these two papers specifically, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this aside. I now have one frame done. We're gonna go ahead and do a second frame. And for this one, I wanna do a 9 by 12 because that is the other size that I work on. And so I'm going to cut this down to 9 by 12 before I create the frame. All right, so now I've got an extra strip we can use for something. And then again, I'm going to come in and cut it at that 3/4 inch mark all the way around so that I can attach white cardstock or any color of cardstock that coordinates well with this paper would do for the inside piece. Just going to come down this way, I think. Yes. All right. Yes. 3/4 inch. And I know this paper looks crazy busy. And you might be thinking, I don't know about this one, Laura. I don't know. That's a little bit wild, but I promise when it is just a border, a little frame for the whole layout, it's really, really nice. And it's a great way to pull in multiple colors in together. Having that multicolored page on the background will help pull multiple colors together inside of the layout so you can have a more cohesive look. Okay, so again, the magical moment that I always really enjoy, pulling out the center. Now we have this lovely frame. And again, if we had a 9x12 piece of white cardstock, you can see it has a nice pop of color around the outside that adds just a little bit more detail, a little bit more fun to a white cardstock background. So now we have two extra large frames. We have a 9x12 and a 12x12. I want to have some smaller frames as well. So like I said, we're going to start out with some frames that are using the paper cutter. So I'm going to grab this piece here. I'm going to cut it down to, how wide is this? That's a good place to start. It's 3 inches wide. So we're going to do 3 inches. The first one we'll do 3 inch by 3 inch square. Okay. And these ones I like to cut a 1/4 inch frame. So I'll just come to the 1/4 inch mark and I will cut out just the center. You do have to be a little bit cautious, a little bit careful when you're cutting out a 1/4 inch frame because it's very easy to accidentally cut over it and cut off the ends. So just be careful. Always good to check yourself before you accidentally cut too far. But I don't worry if I go just a little bit over. It's not a huge deal. It's not really going to show all that much on here. So don't stress if you go over just a little bit. Okay? All right. And quite often too, you'll feel a little give when you get to one of those last couple of lines. You'll feel a little give when you hit the other side. Okay. Here we go. So now we've got a smaller frame and you can keep going. So I have this one little small 1/4 inch frame. You can keep going inside, inside, inside until you run out of square. And I may do a few more of these off camera as well, but I wanted to give you some other options to explore. They don't all have to be square. You could do a rectangle. So we have a 3 inch. I could come out here to 4 inches, make a bigger frame that's 3 by 4. Okay, again, coming into the 1/4 inch. Turn it around, 1/4 inch. Now for some of my veteran scrapbookers, this is not new information. But you may not have considered how far you can stretch a paper pad by using some of these techniques. And for my friends who are newbies, this is good information to use, especially if you don't have a giant scrapbook stash. Then you can stretch your supplies a little further. So now we've got a rectangle version as well. Now you can obviously do other shapes if you have templates, if you have large punches, or if you have dies. So I have several dies. I don't have a ton of dies, but I have several dies that are this nested style die. And so they're all the same shape and they kind of graduate in size. And so how these can make frames is by simply leaving them together. Okay, so let's pull in a different pattern just for something a little bit more interesting. I'm going to pull in this beautiful graduated color. I'll probably get a section that has multiple tones in it. And I'm going to cut out a set of circles. And then I'm going to cut out a set of hearts. So I think I'm going to do the hearts in the pink. And then I think I'm going to do the circles potentially in this wood grain. I'm probably not going to do all of the circles. I'll probably just grab like the smaller 3 or 4 because I don't really need any large circles for this kit. And I'm just trying to give you an example. Plus I have some ideas for using this little piece of wood grain that I did add with my paper pad just because it didn't come with a wood grain. Quite often paper pads do have one sheet, but this one didn't. And I wanted to show you some kind of faux wood embellishments we're going to be making later on. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to, let's start with the circles. Now I keep these taped together because I do quite often use them together. So I'm going to just pop out, let's take the center 5. Okay. There we go. Now, if your washi tape pops off, it's not a big deal. Just line your dies back up. You're trying to get them as evenly in there as possible, but do not panic if they're not perfect, because my dies are never perfect. That's just not a thing. And I refuse to argue or fuss with it and get all upset. I just get it as close as I can and call that good enough. And so in this case, we're going to bring it over here. I want a section that has multiple colors. Thinking like maybe right in here. That looks good. So let me pull out my scissors. We'll cut out that section and run it through the die cutting machine. Now, some of you may have a big fancy die cutting machine, one of the Sizzix's or something like that. Or not the Sizzix, the Silhouette or the Cricut, something like that. This works for that as well, but I do not enjoy using big electronic machines. They don't like me, I find. We're just not friends. And that's okay. That's okay. I don't really need big expensive machines to scrapbook anyway. And I've tried them, just didn't enjoy them, and was not willing to invest in them again when I didn't enjoy them the first time or the second time. So that is why I work with what I work with. Now, here is I use the Magic Mat, which came from scrapbook.com. It's a self-healing mat. I prefer it to using the plastic plates that come with it. I still use this plate on top, but I didn't really like how it was cutting into this, and over time that wears down your plastic plates and you'll have to replace them. I've been using this Magic Mat for over a year now, and it cuts even better. So much cleaner, I think, than the plastic plates. Big fan. Not a requirement, but just something that I like. All right, so just as simple as that, we now have some beautifully cut circle frames that we can use on a layout. Because we nested them, it cut out in between each of the lovely dies a frame. If I didn't use them nested like that, if I had just used one, you would have gotten a circle like this in whatever size you cut. So that is, you could use it for both. If you prefer to have some of the circles, that's absolutely an option as well. And you can go for that. Now, okay, I think I said I was going to do this in the heart paper, or this pink for the hearts, and then I didn't. So that's funny. I love it when I do that, but I'll come out some of those hearts in a minute. But I also wanted to do, with this wood grain paper, a few kind of the rectangle easy frames. So I'm going to do, let's see, this is a 6x6 piece of paper. So let's do a 4x4, I think. Yes, that'll give me a strip to do some other projects with, because I'm going to do some embellishing with this beautiful wood grain paper for sure. Again, I'm going to do a 1/4 inch border all the way around. and I'll cut more of those off camera, but I just wanted to give you an idea of how you can use these paper pads to make some of your own embellishments, as well as some backgrounds and things like that too. You can do both. You don't have to include a bunch of packs of embellishments with your purchase in order to use it for this project. Okay, so now I've cut out those heart frames off camera. So I have a few of those to add to my kit as well. And I have one more way to make frames that doesn't require any fancy tools. Well, I guess unless you consider a punch a fancy tool. It can be a fancy tool, I suppose. Can be kind of expensive too if you get the larger ones. But this is a great way to make a frame just using 2 punches that are the same shape. And use one and then the other. In retrospect, it probably would have been easier to do this the other way around, but I like to make things difficult for myself, apparently. No, let's do it the other way around, because I think that's going to be difficult to see. But essentially just cutting a heart shape. Right? And then coming in with the larger heart shape and cutting around it. Double punching the shape. Yep, that was much easier with the little shape first. Now you've got a heart shape frame. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. I'll just use this larger one as is. But yeah, we can do this with any shape. We can do stars. I think I have 2 similar sizes of stars. Got this one and this one. This one's a little bit smaller. I don't know that, oh, I do have one. I wasn't sure if I had the matching star. But just like with the hearts, we can do a bit of a star shape. Actually, let's do this on the yellow side, kind of the yellowy side of this paper. So now we've got a star and also a star frame. Trying to get it as close to perfect as possible, but to be honest, you don't really need to be completely perfect. So now I've got double punched shapes, also make some frames. So those are a few ideas for ways you can make frames in your stash kit, just using your paper pad. Now you will have to use some sort of tools for this process, whether it is punches, dies, or just your paper cutter, but I think that that is a pretty nifty way to save some money on embellishments when you can just create your own. We are going to be doing some embellishment clusters as well this weekend with some of these punched shapes. So definitely check back in for those coming up probably, oh, I imagine they'll pop up next week. Yes, I was hoping to get all of these videos done this week. That did not happen. Busy moving, but next week I will have a video on embellishment clusters. We'll make just a handful of them for this kit, but that is it for frames. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below. But I think that our nice selection of frames, we have, of course, the hearts and the circles and the squares and rectangles, and then our giant frames, and then of course our punched frames. So lots of ways that you can make frames in your stash kit without having to buy extra embellishment packs. That's it for this one, guys. Do hope you've enjoyed it. Again, if you have any questions, put them down below. And until next time, bye y'all.